Week 17 of the fantasy football season. Here's the top 36 running backs. I'm ranking this week number 1, Christian McCaffrey of the San Francisco 49ers. So McCaffrey easily the best running back this season in fantasy football. Weekly, it's at least 20 plus points. And last week, even in a tougher matchup versus the Baltimore Ravens, he went out there and had a good game. So this week in a great matchup, and where San Francisco wants to bounce back and they're going to feed McCaffrey early and often, I think he has one of the better games he has all season. At the Commanders, number 2, Kyren Williams of the Los Angeles Rams. So what a year it's been for Kyren Williams. Even though he missed 4 games, he's still top 5 in rushing yards amongst running backs. And pretty much weekly, it's 15 plus fantasy points for Kyren. So this week, a good matchup at the New York Giants. A run defense that really isn't that good. And a defense that's been giving up a lot of points this week. So Kyren Williams, once again, I think goes out there and has a nice game. Number 3, Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So Rachaad White, it's been a great season for him, and this Buck team turned their season around, led by White and Mike Evans, and Baker Mayfield playing good football. So this week in a decent matchup versus the New Orleans Saints coming to town, Rachaad White's been a PPR machine, one of the best receiving backs out of the backfield, and I think this week he goes out there once again and puts up that 17-plus number that he pretty much gets each and every week. Number 4, Alvin Kamara, staying in the same game of the New Orleans Saints. So his numbers the last few weeks have dropped off a little bit for Alvin Kamara, but still as well, one of the best receiving backs in the league. A pretty decent matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Even though I know their defense has played better over the last few weeks, I still think Kamara in a big game where the division still is on the line could go out there and have a nice performance. Number 5, Raheem Mostert of the Miami Dolphins. So what a season it's been for Mostert. A guy, obviously, who's been a talented running back, but injuries have always been a concern. But this week, another tougher matchup at the Ravens. Last week, it was a tough one versus the Cowboys, but he found the end zone. And pretty much weekly, you pencil him in for a touchdown and at least 50, 60 yards. And some weeks, we've seen him score 2 touchdowns. So this week at Baltimore, where I think they're going to try to balance this offense out a little bit more, especially if Jalen Waddle's going to be out in this game. I think Mostert's going to get more work and have another big performance. Number 6, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. Saquon Barkley was bottled up in the first half last week, and then second half he came out and had a nice performance. So this week, a pretty decent matchup versus middle of the pack Ram defense. Saquon, we know he's the engine of this offense. Not much going on in the passing game for the New York Giants. And this week versus the Rams, where he's going to get a good workload as usual. 90% touches about his Barkley. Once again, he's a top 10 back. Number 7, Travis Etienne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Etienne's numbers the last few weeks have dropped off a little bit here, but this week a great matchup versus the Panthers that give up top 5 running back numbers to running backs on the ground. So Etienne, we know, is a versatile back, and if Trevor Lawrence is out in this game, they're going to rely on the run more and not want the ball in C.J. Beathard's hand 40, 50 times throwing the football. So this week versus the Panthers, I think they get back to ground and pound. This Jaguar team, they lost the identity a little and got a little bit too pass happy, and that's just part of the reason I think they've lost 4 in a row. Number 8, Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. So Henry, he might be a little bit up here on the list here, but Henry, we know, has got a great track record of using. He's had a solid season. I still think Derrick Henry. I know he's had some stinkers and then games where he's gone out there and scored 2 touchdowns. So this week with a good matchup with a division foe, very familiar with, and still a running back that's still going and making plays. I like Henry this week. Number 9, Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. So Taylor last week, he was bottled up for the most part in that ball game, was Jonathan Taylor at the Atlanta Falcons, but he still found the end zone and he looked pretty healthy. And Zach Morris obviously banged up. We don't know if he's going to play in this game. So this week here in the middle of the pack matchup versus the Vegas Raiders, where their defense, believe it or not, has played better over the last month of the season here. It's tough on paper, but like I said, Taylor's going to get a big workload. And now that he could get his legs under him after returning last week, I think at home where this Colt offense is totally better than it is on the road, he goes out there and has a good game. Number 10, Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So this week, definitely a tough matchup at the Dallas Cowboys. But Jahmyr Gibbs, he's a versatile running back. And next season, he's most likely a first, second rounder minimum for fantasy owners. So Gibbs, he's got breakaway speed. Once he hits that second level, he could hit that home run and find the end zone. And this week at Dallas on a fast track and a shootout, I like Jahmyr Gibbs once again to go out there and have a big game with his catching prowess. He adds a lot to the backfield for fantasy owners in the Lions. Number 11, DeAndre Swift, a former Lion, but now the Philadelphia Eagles. So Swift last week went out there and had a good game versus the New York Giants. And this week here, another great matchup versus the Arizona Cardinals. So this Eagle team, the last 2 weeks now, you got Arizona and the Giants, 2 good matchups. And I think they're going to get back to running the football a little bit more with DeAndre Swift and Kenneth Gainwell mixed in there. So this week with a good matchup, I think Swift has a nice performance once again. Number 12, Breece Hall of the New York Jets. Breece Hall finally had a breakout game, and I know it was a great matchup versus the Commanders, one of the worst defenses in the league. And this week, definitely a tough matchup with the Cleveland Browns. But Breece Hall, a physical running back. At least Trevor Siemian looked like a decent, competent quarterback last week, where he knew what he was doing at the line of scrimmage, and even putting in Hall in decent position to go out there and make plays. So this week in Cleveland, if the Jets want to pull off the upset, I think they're going to run the football early and often and just keep running no matter what. And we know Hall's a decent receiver out of the backfield as well, where we've seen him this season take some screens to the end zone. Number 13, Bijan Robinson of the Atlanta Falcons. So Bijan Robinson last week, one of the better games of the season for him in his rookie year. So Bijan, we know, is an explosive running back. An opportunity just has to be there for him, because if this guy get 15, 17 touches a game, it doesn't take much for him to go out there and have a good fantasy performance. So this week with a good matchup with the Chicago Bears, that James Conner just went out and had 22 fantasy points against last week. I think Bijan could go out there once again and have a solid game for owners. 14, Austin Eckler of the Los Angeles Chargers. So Austin Eckler, he had a decent ball game, I thought, last week with Eckler, where he got opportunity and more chances, where with the old coaching staff, before everyone got fired, it was pretty much a three-way split over the last few weeks with Spiller in there, Joshua Kelly, and Austin Eckler. So Austin Eckler back, getting the majority of the touches it was. And this week, a good matchup at the Denver Broncos, where they've had trouble all season stopping the run. So Eckler, division foe, a team he's familiar with, and a team where he's had good success. Number 15, James Cook of the Buffalo Bills. So Cook last week, a lot of people thought he was going to break out and once again have a monster game after coming off 35-plus fantasy points versus the Dallas Cowboys in Week 15. But this week here, I think he gets back on track as Cook. After last week, he did have 20 touches, which is a big number, and they're going more with the run more than ever is this Buffalo team, and that's why they've had success with great balance on offense over the last month of the season. But this week versus New England, I think Cook's going to have a few breakout type of runs in this one. I know New England's defense, for the most part, has been tough versus opposing backs in terms of yard per carry, but James Cook, we know, is a good receiver out of the backfield, and for whatever reason last week he wasn't much involved in the passing game. 16, Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. It's been a mixed bag of results all season for Pollard, where he was a first, second rounder in most fantasy drafts, and this week here it's a tough matchup on paper versus the Detroit Lions that give up the least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. So right now, Tony Pollard, we know, is an explosive back, but that injury definitely took a step or two away from him compared to last season, where I thought he had a better fantasy season. So in a game with a potential shootout, and I hope to see Pollard catch more passes out of the backfield. This week, he's more of running two back for owners. 17, Aaron Jones of the Green Bay Packers. He returned last week. Was Aaron Jones after he's been out most of the season with a hamstring injury, and he looked pretty solid. Was Aaron Jones this week a good matchup with the Minnesota Vikings, a team he's owned throughout his career, and he's a running back that can catch the ball out of the backfield, running between the tackles, and with all the injuries at the receiver position with Christian Watson, Jaden Reed, we saw Wicks leave the game as well. I think he's going to get more involved in the passing game in this one. It's Aaron Jones, 18, Joe Mixon of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Joe Mixon, it's been an up and down season for him, and this week a tough matchup, no doubt about it, at the Kansas City Chiefs, even though we just saw Zamir White go for 23 carries and 145 yards on this defense. So Joe Mixon, we know, is a dual threat, can catch the football out of the backfield a little bit and decent in between the tackles. But this is a game where I think they're going to stack the box and make Jake Browning try to beat him, even though last week they tried it versus the Raiders and it just didn't work, where Aiden O'Connell barely had to throw the football at all in that one. Number 19, David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. Said David Montgomery, it's been a solid first year for him in Detroit, and him and Jahmyr Gibbs, one of the best 1-2 combos, in my opinion, in the league in the backfield. So this week, I know it's a tough matchup with the Cowboys. Montgomery, though, a physical running back, and the Cowboys, they're that type of defense where the physical back has given them trouble, where they're running right at him and trying to run guys over. So I think Montgomery in a potential shootout this week at Dallas has a good game. Once again, number 20, Devon Achane of the Miami Dolphins. So last week, Mostert, he got banged up a little bit with the ankle injury. He was in and out of the lineup, but I expect him to play in a big game at the Baltimore Ravens, where the Dolphins are still trying to play for that first seed in the AFC. But anyway, Devon Achane's an explosive running back, and I think they got to find ways to get him in space a little bit more as this Miami Dolphin team. So this week, I know it's a tough matchup with Baltimore, but Achane, with the many things he could do, catching the football out of the backfield and the home run ability, I still think he's a decent number 2 back for owners. 21, Ezekiel Elliott of the New England Patriots. So Ramondre Stevenson, it's been a bad injury for him, but to be honest, Ezekiel Elliott at times has looked better than Ramondre Stevenson has this season. So this week, I know a tough matchup with Buffalo, a game where they could be trailing early and often have to abandon the run. But Zeke Elliott, he's definitely improved as a wide receiver, and a guy that many people thought was done after the Cowboys cut him loose. And he signed on late with the Patriots in the offseason. I think next year he's going to latch on with another team, and he could be a piece that could help a team. And this week at the Buffalo Bills on workload and volume, I think Zeke could carve out a decent role. 22, Kenneth Walker of the Seattle Seahawks. So Kenneth Walker, it's been an up and down season for him, but he just hasn't had those consistent games week in and week out. Some games he'll go out there, get 20, 25 fantasy points, and then some weeks he'll throw in a dud where he has 7, 8 fantasy points. So this week, it's a decent matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know their defense has been better over the last few weeks, but the Seattle offense has played better at home all season. So this week with the 12th man, and I think them trying to get back to the running game a little bit after they abandoned it at Tennessee, even though Tennessee was a good run defense this season. I think Kenneth Walker goes out there and has a decent game. 23, Zamir White, Las Vegas Raiders. Zamir White, he's been surprising over the last few weeks here, starting for Josh Jacobs, who missed with the quadriceps and an illness. And to be honest here, Josh Jacobs, we know he signed that 1-year franchise tag where he might not be in a rush to come back, and hoping he don't get hurt more, where then he definitely loses out on a contract. But anyways, Zamir White's been the more physical back over the last couple of weeks, and we've seen more from Jacobs for the majority of the season. And this week, he's got a great matchup with the Indianapolis Colts. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. So right here, if Jacobs misses the game once again, I like White as a solid RB2 this week. 24, James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals. So the last 3 weeks, James Conner has definitely gone out there and put up big performances, but this week a very tough matchup at the Philadelphia Eagles. They give up the second least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. Last week we saw Saquon Barkley go out there and have a nice performance for the New York Giants versus Philly D. But this Philly D, if it's one thing they've done good all season, is stop the opposing running backs. So Conner at this point is a number 2 running back to even flex option. 25, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So Javonte Williams, it's been an up and down season for him. I know he came off the ACL injury last season into this season, and they run 3 backs over there with McLaughlin and Samaje Perine, more the passing downs back. But this week a great matchup versus the Los Angeles Chargers that give up the 5th most fantasy points to running backs on the season. So right now, if Denver plays with a lead we've seen this season, Javonte's going to get his 25 touches in a game. But we've seen a lot of games where it's been back and forth and where they had to play catch up, where the touches haven't been there. But Williams did find the end zone last week. And this week versus the Chargers, where their offense really isn't hitting on all cylinders, I think he's a decent back. This week, 26, Jaylen Warren of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Jaylen Warren, it's been an up and down type of year for Warren and this whole backfield as a whole, and this whole offense. So Warren, we know, is a good receiver out of the backfield. We know he's got explosiveness, and I've said it all year, he's been a better back, in my opinion, than Najee Harris. So this week, a tougher matchup at the 12th man in Seattle, but Warren is a flex option. I still think could go out there and be productive. 27, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So Jerome Ford, it's been a solid fill-in season for him. For Nick Chubb, who's been out for the majority of the season with the ACL injury. So Jerome Ford's gone out there. He's making plays. We know he's got home run ability, and he's been a running back that it seems like each and every week he's found the end zone. So even in a tough matchup versus the New York Jets this week, I think Jerome Ford could get his at least 10, 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues. 28, Chuba Hubbard of the Carolina Panthers. So Chuba Hubbard, it's been a solid season for him since he's taken over the reins as the starting running back for this Carolina Panther team, with Miles Sanders pretty much not doing much, and Hubbard a better receiver out of the backfield. And even in between the tackles, he's handled 20, 25 touches. So this week, a decent matchup at the Jacksonville Jaguars. But like I say, every week with this offense, there's not much going on, and teams are zeroing in on Chubbard and Adam Thielen. But even last week, they put up 30 points and still lost was Carolina. So this week at Jacksonville, I still think they could put up points, but I don't see Hubbard having that huge game. 29, Ty Chandler of the Minnesota Vikings. So Chandler last week, he was the man in the backfield with Alexander Mattison active. But to be honest, none of these backs did anything. I know Chandler found the end zone, but if he didn't have that touchdown, he only had 2 fantasy points in PPR league. So this week versus the Green Bay Packers, it's definitely a matchup where they're runnable on is this Green Bay Packer team. Ty Chandler, I think, is a better back than Alexander Mattison. Definitely a better receiver out of the backfield. In between the tackles, he looked pretty decent. I think this week he could bounce back, but after a performance last week here, it's tough to have 100% confidence putting him in your lineup. 30, Najee Harris of the Pittsburgh Steelers. So Harris, he's been a touchdown-dependent back all season here, and if he's not scoring the touchdown, he's pretty much maxing out 6-7 fantasy points. We know he's not much of a receiver out of the backfield. That's more Jaylen Warren's role. And this week at Seattle, tough environment and a pretty decent defense versus the run. Harris is nothing more than a flex option. 31, Clyde Edwards-Helaire of the Kansas City Chiefs. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, he's been solid filling in for Isaiah Pacheco over the last few weeks. And I know Pacheco came back last week. He found the end zone but left that game with a concussion at the Las Vegas Raiders. So this week here, Clyde Edwards-Helaire won't get the start in this one, where I don't think Isaiah Pacheco is going to be ready in time for this ball game. So Helaire, we know, could catch the football out of the backfield. In between the tackles, not the greatest of running backs, obviously, but I think this week, while he gets the starting nod, he's a decent flex option versus Cincinnati Bengals. 32, Devin Singletary of the Houston Texans. So Singletary took that starting job early in the season for the most part from Damian Pierce. And Pierce, we saw last week, he did return a touchdown, but really he didn't do anything else and not even get many touches. So this week, not a great matchup versus Tennessee Titans, where they're one of the toughest teams, believe it or not, to run the football on. So I think Devin Singletary could go out there and at best be a flex option, because I don't think his ceiling is that high in this one. 33, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. I know Robinson missed the last few weeks with a hamstring injury, and maybe he'll be back in time for this game versus the Niners, but obviously a very tough matchup versus San Francisco, one of the best defenses in the league. Last week, we didn't really see Justice Hill or Gus Edwards do much, besides obviously Edwards getting his weekly goal line touchdown and on a broken play have a 41-yard catch. But besides that, this defense is great versus the run. And Brian Robinson, I know he's a running back that definitely improved from last year to this year, especially in the pass game, but this week, he's not much more than a flex option with a tough matchup and most likely not being 100%. 34, Khalil Herbert of the Chicago Bears. Devonta Foreman, he was out in last week's game, and Herbert took over the backfield. And he had a pretty decent ball game with Khalil Herbert, 19 fantasy points in PPR leagues. But this week here, a tougher matchup versus the Atlanta Falcons. I give up the least amount of fantasy points to running backs on the season. So right now over there in Chicago, their offense has played a little bit better over the last few weeks, but it's tough to trust Herbert with Foreman possibly coming back and a tough matchup. And pretty much he didn't do anything all season until that nice game last week. 35, Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens. So Gus Edwards, like I mentioned earlier in the video, he's a touchdown-dependent running back. It's either a touchdown or nothing for Gus the Bus. So last week he found the end zone and he had a broken play, 41-yard catch. But besides that, yards per carry really haven't been there. Justice Hill, for the most part, got majority of the touches early in that game. And this week versus Miami, I definitely could see Edwards get a goal line stomper, but pretty much that's it in a potential shootout. In the 36th and final running back I'm ranking, Tyjae Spears of the Tennessee Titans. Some games this season, he's actually out-touched and out-snapped Derrick Henry in ball games. And we know he's one of the better receiving backs out of the backfield this Spears, and especially on a Tennessee team with a bad offensive line. And they got to get rid of the ball pretty quick as their quarterbacks in Tannehill and Will Levis. I think Tyjae Spears as a flex option in deeper leagues could be a decent option in a potential shootout at the Houston Texans, where their defense over the last few weeks has definitely struggled. And like Tyjae Spears this week as number 36, so that's the top 36 running backs I'm ranking for Week 17 of the fantasy football season.